This next step along the path to the internal communication sweet spot is all about underpinning your team's technical ability to deliver by assessing the fitness for purpose of your current IC practices. And we'll start by clarifying the purposes of internal communication. Then we can look at a system that's been built from the ground up to be demonstrably fit for those purposes. This will enable us to consider some of the vulnerabilities that can often be hidden away inside traditional IC practices, and then you can think about what you may want or need to do to extend or refine the system you have in place at the moment. So, given that we can't know if anything is fit for purpose unless we first of all know what that purpose is, we clearly need to begin there. And this means checking that each of these practices, whether it's the briefing process, style guide, channel mix, or whatever, is not only designed to work effectively in its own right, but dovetails perfectly with all the other practices to create a fit for purpose IC system. So what might such a system look like, and how does it compare with what you have at present? Inevitably, you'll have some of it in place, but is it all there? And does it all connect up as well as it could? If it does, terrific. If not, there's an opportunity waiting for you. Now obviously the system needs to work harmoniously against the background of your organization's mission, vision, values and business plan, and against that background there should be some staple components of IC infrastructure in place, which would include things like the IC team's policies and procedures, the organization's channel mix, message calendar and so on. And then there will be business issues that arise which people somewhere in the organization need to deal with. Some of these issues will be planned, others unplanned, and whichever they are, there will need to be some initial work done to sort out how best to either tackle the problem or take advantage of the opportunity. Now, what follows is very much a form of shorthand, but this initial work is likely to involve considering the people. Are there enough people with the right skills to handle it? And money. How much is it going to cost to deal with the problem or capitalize on the opportunity? And it may mean going outside to find other expertise, hardware, or simply more pairs of hands to deliver whatever's needed. This initial work may take months if it's part of the business planning process, or in the case of an emergency, could happen in a matter of an hour or two. At some point though, the people responsible for this issue will need to tell employees what's going on, and that's when they're likely to brief a member of the internal communication team. Now, emergencies can often mean we need to take shortcuts, but if we can, we should always be trying to do the job properly, and certainly on any other occasion, there are at least 3 things that must happen at the briefing stage. Firstly, we need to validate that decision to communicate. Do we really need to do this, or is it actually going to be a bit of a waste of time? We also need to follow fit-for-purpose briefing procedures and check against the message calendar to ensure this message isn't going to get lost in a pile of others, and we need to consider which channels would be best suited and so on. And unique to internal communication, the third thing we need to do is some SMARTED analysis. Now we already know the SMARTED principle tells us that employees are likely to need certain resources in order to perform as the organization wants, and this makes internal communication quite different from its external counterparts. It's actually another one of those myths, possibly one of the greatest myths of our age, that ever since the advent of social media, people have been telling us that the walls between internal and external communication are breaking down. However, they say this only because they simply haven't understood just how different internal communication is from its external cousins. But what makes it so different? There are in fact many things, of which the impact of the SMARTED principle is just one. To understand this, let's imagine that, say, a mobile phone company is about to run 2 communication campaigns, one external to launch its latest phone and the other internal to promote new security procedures. Let's look at how the SMARTED principle plays out in these 2 situations. When it comes to the product launch, let's consider who's responsible for ensuring the audience has the resources to buy the new phone, starting of course with the skills. Now it doesn't take that much skill as such, but you probably wouldn't trust a 4-year-old to do it. However, unless there's a radically new buying process involved, the business would be likely to rely on the customer to have the few skills that are needed. As for having the money to do what the business wants, well, that's obviously going to be in the customer's hands as well. And yes, the business may set up some easy payment terms, but actually having the money to buy the phone is still very much down to the customer. Authority to buy the phone is also theirs, as is the responsibility and the time. It's not until we get to information that the business actually has a role to play at all, and even then, the audience could always go and seek out independent reviews. As for equipment, well, the organisation may be providing shops with tills, or if the phone is available online, they may need to provide a trading website. But the customer would also need to have online access. It's only when we get to desire that the organisation has sole charge of providing the resource. Now, how does that compare with the internal communication campaign? Who's responsible for ensuring the audience has the necessary skills to follow any new procedures? Obviously, it's the organisation. And if it's going to involve any budgetary outlay, again, that's going to be down to the organisation to provide it. And it's the same with the authority the employees are going to have, their responsibilities. Indeed, every one of the Smarteed resources is in the hands of the organisation. So it's a profoundly different situation from that of an external campaign. And if an internal communication goes to people who don't have the resources they need, that communication is almost bound to fail and incur at least some of the communication failure costs we'll be looking at in the next section of this ebook. That's why we need to do all we reasonably can during the briefing process to tease out the resources an internal audience may require if they're going to deliver what's expected of them, and if needs be, flag up the shortfalls to the people in a position to do something about them, which may give rise to all manner of other types of internal communication in order to make up those shortfalls before the original communication request can be properly fulfilled. Then we need to consider the approvals process, which can so often get stuck, delaying the delivery of what the audience needs and often compromising the quality of what they get as well. This often occurs because of people changing their minds and moving the goalposts. So what might happen if anyone in a position to move the goalpost later on were to approve and sign off the brief before anyone starts working on the communication itself? And if the brief itself is robust and signed off, and the writers and designers have fit-for-purpose style guides to follow, how much smoother and easier might that creative process be, and how much easier might the approvals process be as well? With the brief already signed off, there are only 3 things the approval groups need to concern themselves with. Firstly, does the communication fulfill the brief? In other words, it says everything they agreed to and nothing they didn't agree to. Excellent. Secondly, is it technically accurate? Are all the facts and figures correct? Tick. And finally, is everybody happy with the style? Now, if you've got a style guide, it should usually just be a case of whether or not it meets those standards. Importantly, though, it may be that someone notices a hole in the style guide which provides an opportunity to improve the standards that are already there. So a fit-for-purpose approvals process should not only be efficient and painless, it should also enable you to refine your style guides and help ensure they too are as fit for purpose as possible. And obviously, once the communication is signed off, it can be delivered, and at this point many senior managers think to themselves, job done. But of course it isn't. We have to check that the IC practices themselves are working for the audience. So we need to go back to them and find out if they got the message, if they understood it, and if they were happy with how they were told. All of which can enable us to keep on top of our IC infrastructure and help ensure it's still fit for purpose or becomes even more so. And of course, we're not just communicating for the sake of it. We're doing it to support employee performance, which means we also need to check if the communications are going to deliver that performance. And if the audience tell us they're not, we've got the opportunity to go back in and find out what's stopping them and provide timely management information back up the way. Of course, if the audience say they are going to deliver what's expected of them, it may still be appropriate to monitor this, because if they're not doing what they said they'd do, we need to be able to find out as quickly as possible what's stopping them and feed that information back to the people in a position to do something about it. And sometimes, if the issue is important enough, it may be appropriate for the employee's behaviour to be included in their performance appraisal, which is where the HR function takes over. And obviously there, if people are doing what's expected, it should be reflected in their reward and recognition, and also if they're not doing so. Interestingly though, because performance appraisals are internal communication activities, there's an opportunity once again to get some Smarteed feedback and find out what's getting in the way and feed that back to the leadership team. So here we have a system which, if the design of all the component parts is fit for purpose, should, with the right skills and mandate, enable your team to deliver optimum results for your organization. So what happens if that isn't how things are set up at the moment? What if, for example, your briefing process isn't set up to validate those decisions to communicate in a fit-for-purpose way? Or if there's no validation step at all? It may mean some decisions to communicate are on shaky ground before you even start. And if the briefing process doesn't include SMARTIED analysis, you may easily be missing out on vital management information, which could mean other communications which need to be briefed first get missed and may have to be done in a rush later on. Then there's the question of what happens if the brief isn't being signed off, and the risks of the approvals process getting stuck or resulting in uncomfortable compromises which can undermine the quality of the communication. And if there are no style guides, or the style guides aren't good enough to adequately support the writers or designers, those people may take longer to do their work because they're unsure of how to proceed, or their work may be of a lower quality than it otherwise would be. And if the approvals process isn't enabling you to make appropriate updates to the writing style guide, it may be less robust than it could be. Similarly, if you have a weak system for getting feedback on your IC practices, you may be missing out on opportunities to improve your IC infrastructure. And if that part of the system is missing altogether, that infrastructure may be weaker still. Finally, if the results feedback system is weak, your senior managers may be missing out on loads of timely management information, weakening their decisions to communicate even further. And if that system isn't there at all, your business leaders may unknowingly be flying largely blind. This then is how vulnerable an IC system can be, and demonstrably not nearly as fit for purpose as it could be. Now, your current situation may well be stronger than this, but can it fully meet those minimum hygiene criteria your leadership team might rightly expect? Crucially, of course, fit-for-purpose practices are not just about having all these component parts in place, but ensuring that each of them is itself demonstrably fit for purpose. So let's just clarify what the specific practices need to be. Leaving aside the HR and finance roles, we can see that we need to start with the client's decisions to communicate. We also need a robust and complete briefing process. The channel mix, message calendar and style guide need to be up to the job, as do people's drafting practices. Then there's the approvals process and the two feedback systems, one to keep tabs on the quality of the IC practices themselves, and the other to provide that all-important management information on what has to happen for employees to deliver specific results. So if any of these need to be worked on, how do we do it? First of all, the decisions to communicate are obviously happening before you get involved, but there are two ways in which your team can help ensure those decisions are fit for purpose. One way is by having a robust validation method built into your briefing process, and the other is by providing the best and most timely management information possible with which the message owners can take their decisions. Importantly though, for all of these activities, you need to have the right mandate, practice designs and execution skills. So what can you do now to start addressing any shortfalls that could be keeping you out of the sweet spot at the moment? If you feel there may be potential to improve the fitness for purpose of some of your current practices, ICM have a couple of programs through which you can learn to do this. The first deals with these 5. And the second covers these 3. Now, depending on your circumstances, it may be that just having these practice designs right may be enough to get you the mandate you want. If you're confident that this technical mandate will be all you need, you may want to think about formally assessing your current IC system to identify if there's anything you need to be working on and what specifically it is. And if you think you already know some of the shortfalls and are curious about how we'd help you address them, by all means take a look at these 2 programs. Now, of course, if you feel you may need a stronger business case to get the budget you need, or to get your clients and approval groups to let you change their working practices, you may want to move on to one or both of the remaining parts of this VBook, or share this one with your boss or colleagues. If you want to take a look at the financial mandate section, it'll show you how to ensure you've always got all the budget you require, so that anyone who needs to learn new practices or improve their skills can learn how to hit that sweet spot and have enough time to practice and do the job properly thereafter. And the cultural mandate section explains how to ensure that everyone your team needs to deal with at any point in the future will always let IC specialists do their job properly. Or if you're out of time and need to come back, just slot a space to do so in your calendar. And if you want to talk to us about defining your sweet spot or anything else you've just learned, do drop us a line. We'd love to hear from you.